Well, good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. President Trump's speech in Poland last week may have been the single best thing he has said out loud since entering politics, and for one reason. It was a rousing defense of Western civilization. Now, you wouldn't think speeches doing that would be unusual. The only reason you hire leaders in the first place is to defend your civilization, especially ours, which is the foundation of pretty much everything we have: our history, our language, our art, science, law, our entire culture. America itself is the product of Western civilization. So you'd think the people running the West would want to defend all of that. But no, it was left to Donald Trump to do it.
Thank you. We write symphonies. We pursue innovation. We celebrate our ancient heroes, embrace our timeless traditions and customs, and always seek to explore and discover brand new frontiers. The fundamental question of our time is whether the West has the will to survive. Do we have the confidence in our values to defend them at any cost?
Now, admittedly, President Trump is a polarizing figure, but the words you just heard him speak shouldn't be controversial. The West is indisputably the freest, the cleanest, the fairest civilization in history. That's why so many immigrants want to move here. It's definitely under attack. That's what ISIS and the Berkeley riots are about. And of course, it will fall if we don't guard it. Everything undefended eventually does. Even Trump haters ought to be able to admit all of that because it's true, but they can't admit it. Instead, they're calling this speech bigoted, the line about symphonies especially bigoted.
He threw in there, we write symphonies. And that's what that triggered the alarm bells for me. Am I wrong in making this parallel between Steve King, President Trump, and white nationalism?
Trump seemed to embody and enshrine that belief that the West should steel itself for a clash of civilizations with other cultures, other beliefs, which pretty much spelled out, the Muslim world.
So this is not a speech he could have given really any place else. And this is a white America first kind of speech.
So extolling the virtues of symphonies is now racist. Slate.com called it, quote, white nationalist rhetoric. According to The Atlantic, it is racial and religious paranoia. Okay, let's pause for a second, tone it down, and consider the argument the president's critics are making here. Trump actually didn't say a word about race, not one. He talked instead about art, innovation, science, free speech, democracy. Those are not racial categories. They are statements about belief, the beliefs that in fact created this country and have sustained it for centuries since. The question is, has the left actually rejected those beliefs, those values? Can we no longer agree that free speech, for example, is better than censorship, that representative government is superior to dictatorship, that our civil code is preferable to Sharia law? And if we can't agree on those things, what are we all doing in the same country? How can we keep living together? What is the point of all of this? Well, there was a time when the American left grappled with questions like those. Those are the real questions, by the way. That was a time before the progressive movement became governed by a reactionary, almost Oedipal impulse to destroy the institutions that made it possible, purely for the joy of destroying them, for tearing it all down. The left used to have ideas. They believed in culture. Now they think symphonies are a sign of white privilege. What happened? And can the purges be far behind? Maybe Brad Woodhouse will know. He works at Americans United for Change, and he joins us now. So, Brad, why are symphonies a sign of white privilege?
Well, look, I don't believe symphonies are the issue here. And look, count me in the category of people that don't think that we should overanalyze speeches written for Donald Trump to read. Look, this man is not intellectually curious. We haven't seen any stories out of the White House about him sweating over the details of speeches with a yellow pad. So I'm not convinced that the words that he always speaks, that he even really realizes what he's saying.
Wait a second.
But that said,
Well, the predicate should be the president is responsible for what he says.
Well, yes,
whether
I was
he
getting
writes
to that.
it or not. And,
correct.
And the genius who occupied the office for 8 previous years, Mr. Harvard Law Review, never gave a speech like this defending Western civilization. So why is it so offensive when Trump does?
Well, I don't think, look, the words like Western civilization are not in and of themselves words that would raise alarm bells. I mean, we're proud of Western civilization.
We are?
But I think the question here is,
are we
Tucker,
really proud of Western civilization?
the question here, Tucker, is you have to contextualize these things. The man that wrote the speech, Stephen Miller, is a protege of Steve Bannon. Steve Bannon was a leader of the white nationalist movement. His favorite book one that is a grotesque book about migrants.
Know what his favorite book is.
Well,
I mean, let's stop with the
migrants
propaganda.
taking over.
Let's be
Look,
okay, so
Tucker.
you're saying because the guy who writes the speech knows a guy you don't like, the speech itself is illegitimate. Let's just deal with the text of the speech, shall we? And the speech says, look, our civilization is superior, and we need to defend it. And a lot of people on the left are saying, you're not allowed to say that. And my question is, why can't you say that? What's wrong with saying that?
But why can't Trump more extol the type of remarks that George W. Bush made in Poland twice in 2001 and 2003? He didn't want to say that Western civilization should keep others out, that Western civilization should retreat. He said Western civilization should be a beacon to the world and it should promote freedom and democracy. He didn't say
that's actually kind of what Trump said. And
he didn't say, look, Trump didn't say that. And by the way, Tucker, you're a wordsmith. You know that words have meaning, and they're dog whistles in words.
Now, so what? Okay, but let's just get back to the text. I agree with you on this. Words matter. I think these words actually, whatever one thinks of Trump or his shortcomings, these words are important. And the words themselves are offensive to many on the left because they're considered nationalistic or chauvinistic, exclusive. They somehow put Western civilization above other civilizations. And my argument would be, if you're a leader of Western civilization, you ought to believe it's superior. And the left doesn't.
Why not? Well, first of all, that's not true. But this is This is not just about Western civilization. Now, let's take Sebastian Gorka. Sebastian Gorka is...
No, I'm not going to take Sebastian Gorka. I want to talk about the idea here, and you're off on some other...
No, I'm not.
Let's get back
to Sebastian Gorka. Hold on, Tucker.
You don't like Sebastian Gorka, okay.
Talked about this speech before it was given. He said it was a speech that extolled Western civilization, which is fine, and Christian values. But those two terms put together are a dog whistle to white nationalists. What we're really talking about is Christian, European, and white.
But this is...
And this
is a country founded on European culture. And it's so appealing that tons of people from Africa and India and Latin America who are not of European ancestry want to come here because they like the ideas. So you believe this country is racially exclusive and the ideas it's founded upon are racist, but all these people from the third world don't appear to believe that. They want to come here because it's a great country because they agree with the values it was founded on. And my question is, why does the American left not agree with them on that?
I believe that everyone should look at Western civilization, Judeo-Christian values as a beacon to the rest of the world. What is wrong with this speech? Donald Trump believes, Tucker, is that we should ban Muslims from coming into the country. He believes that Mexican immigrants are racist and murderers. He believes that...
Come on, can we just have an adult conversation really quick?
Tucker,
let me just ask you, I know Trump is bad, okay, fine, but let me just, these are real questions, okay?
Yeah, sure.
So Europe has had a culture, a distinctive culture, a series of them for like thousands of years. All of a sudden, a ton of people move in who disagree with the tenets of that culture, and they're changing it. So my question, really simple to you, is the culture into which they're coming, the Western civilization we're talking about, superior to the culture that these immigrants are bringing? The culture of Sharia law, the culture of theocracy, the culture of the Middle East? Is ours better than theirs? Can you say that? It's a really simple question.
Well, I can't say that,
Why?
Tucker, because I don't believe some of the things you're saying.
So there you go.
I don't believe that they are. I don't believe that people are bringing Sharia law into the United States and they're trying.
What
to
about the ones who say they are?
Some extra. But it's really
religious law. Trump is making a pretty simple argument that Bill Clinton would have made, that almost any mainstream figure in the Democratic Party would have made 30 years ago. You come here, you got to buy into our values. Here's what they are: freedom of speech, tolerance, pluralism.
And with that, I don't have any problem.
Okay, so then what is the problem exactly?
No, Tucker, what you want to focus on and what every conservative commentator has focused on is the text of the speech and not the context of the people who are advising him, who are writing the speech.
But this is insane. Because the ideas, I don't even know what white nationalist means, and I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole with you now, but I want to address the ideas themselves. If you have a country full of 335 million people who don't share common values, why does that country not break apart? This is something the left never thinks about, even as it encourages massive immigration into the country, people who don't agree with the people who live here. So, that's not good.
I'm perfectly fine with an American culture, with patriotism.
And so what does that consist of? What is American culture?
I don't believe that the only people who are worthy of being American or being in Western civilization are Christian.
But nobody is arguing that, and Trump is not arguing that.
When he was, the reason
what the hell are you talking about? You're trying to make this scary. You're doing like the Southern Poverty Law Center thing with me. Let me ask the last question. What are these American values that all immigrants ought to share?
Well, I believe they
What
should
are they?
share freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of religion, of the practice of religion.
I don't
It
know that
shouldn't be-
anyone disagrees with that.
Well, you know, when you have
was
a
the last time
president,
someone said
when you
that
have a
out
president
loud?
who ran on a campaign of banning Muslims from coming into the country, that raises a lot of questions in my mind
But why
about
wouldn't-
his commitment.
But
to,
the guy said again and again, look, if you don't share our values and you want to impose your religious system on ours, and if you're willing to use violence to do that, we don't want you.
Well, of course.
Why is that a crazy thing to say?
If you have people that are known to practice violence or are known to be involved in terrorism, his position in the campaign was to ban all Muslims, and then he goes and gives a white national speech in Poland. So
it's not a white national. You know what?
It's context, Tucker.
stoking the
Tucker, it's
fires
context.
of race hatred with like overstatement like that will not end well at all. It wasn't a white nationalist speech. It was if
It
defending
wasn't a white
Western
nationalist speech. It had
civilization is white nationalism.
It had
then-
white nationalist elements to it. It had.
I wish
it
we had more
dog
time. We're
whistles.
out of time, unfortunately. We need to move to the common sense portion of the program. But thank you, Brad, for joining
Thank
us.
you.
For more on the reaction to the president's speech and the backlash against it, we're joined by Charles Krauthammer, writer and columnist, who is, as we've noted before, perhaps the finest example of what Western civilization can produce. Charles, was this a white nationalist speech?
Well, I disagree with you when you said we're out of time, unfortunately. I think that was fortunate that you were out of time, because that was a ridiculous discussion. The idea that somehow a defense of Western civilization is white nationalist is simply so absurd it's almost ridiculous to debate it. John Kennedy's inaugural address under those categories would be a white nationalist speech. He is the hero of American liberalism in this generation. He gave a speech in 1960 which was a rigorous defense of the values of the West. Nobody would even have imagined to say that's white nationalism. The fact that Donald Trump has said other stuff in other places makes that an interesting speech. I pointed out that I thought the speech in Warsaw was a total contradiction and refutation of his own inaugural address, which I thought was very nationalist, very narrow, very America first. Here was a man defending Western civilization writ large, which is exactly the main idea that liberals and conservatives have carried ever since the Second World War.
But they no longer do. And so that's kind of the bigger
right.
question is, what do you do with the country where huge percentages of the population don't agree on anything? And I don't just mean transgender bathrooms or tax rates. I mean, they don't agree on what civilization ought to represent the country.
I think that's a failure of the liberal elite, because that's what they teach. They control the universities. They control all the elements of the culture. I mean, they have the basic upper hand in all the elements of the culture. I'm not saying they control all the media. Obviously, you and I are speaking freely and otherwise. But what they teach our children is the pathology of Western history, the sins of the fathers. There's not a civilization on earth that is not founded on crimes and sins. What distinguishes the West is how it's redeemed itself in so many of these areas. The abolition of slavery is a Western invention, not slavery itself. Slavery is ubiquitous. And the glories of our civilization are not taught. You raise a generation that is taught only about the pathohistory of one's country, and they ended up either indifferent or hating it. That's the problem. I don't think it's immigration. I don't think it's the threat of Sharia law. It's an internal rot. And I thought that Trump addressed that. The civilization has to believe in itself. The beginning of the end of any great civilization, even the not so great, is when they begin to doubt themselves. That happened with the Soviets in the 80s. Gorbachev was the first who realized this was a rotten system that didn't have a future, that was inhuman and impractical, and that's when it fell apart.
Of course, as you know it would. So if you were to articulate a short list of precepts of beliefs that every person coming here or currently living here ought to share in common, what would they be?
Well, I think it's the precepts that bring people here. When you find people floating in the South China Sea on a raft, having escaped a country, they want to come here. Why? Free speech, the ability to be able to live your own life by your own lights. That's essentially the main element. Freedom, Statue of Liberty. That's what attracted immigrants for 200 years. Freedom lived out in a system that actually honors it and protects it, not just speaks about it. That's the one thing that distinguishes us. We're not liberty, equality, and fraternity. We're a nation of liberty. We have a statue not of equality, but of liberty. And that's what people want.
And it works, or has. Charles, thanks. So please stay right there. We want to ask you about something else in just a minute.